It's the 21st of November 2012. The audio you can hear in the background is from a video I took as I was on the Educate, Empower, Employ March, organised by the National Union of Students, the NUS. I'd be turning 21 in a couple of weeks' time. I joined friends from the Darwin Student Committee, was bussed up to London from my university, University of Kent, and joined thousands of students marching against the government's higher education policies, which included rising tuition fees, tackling graduate unemployment, as well as cuts to the education maintenance allowance for further education. Now, this isn't the 2010 protest you might remember, the one that made the front pages when students clashed with police near Millbank Tower in London. That was 2 years earlier. This is the march that didn't make the headlines, the one that the media largely ignored. Nearly 14 years after the protest I attended, students who took out loans from 2012 onwards are saddled with debts they are nowhere near paying off. And those fees were never supposed to be what they became. A campaign by Rethink Repayment and the wider student movement is calling on the UK government to reform the student loan system. Welcome to Spare a Thought, the podcast that shines a light on people, issues, organisations and ideas that are often overlooked or misrepresented in the media. I'm your host, Tom Spare, and today I'm focused on rethinking the student loan system in the UK. To understand where we are now, we need to go back in time a bit. For most of the 20th century, university in the UK was free, not just affordable, but free. And it was largely the preserve of a small, privileged slice of society. That began to change in 1992 when John Major's government passed legislation granting polytechnic institutions university status. Almost overnight, the number of universities in the UK nearly doubled. The sector expanded dramatically, and with it, the number of people going into higher education. Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister from 1997 to 2007, then set a target of getting 50% of young people into university. Applications soared, and by the early 2020s, there were close to 3 million students studying at UK universities. But expanding the sector created a question that nobody had a clean answer to. Who pays for it? Who pays for the expansion? Who pays for people going to university? The answer, it turned out, were the students. So tuition fees were introduced in 1998 at £1,000 a year. Controversial, but manageable. They rose to £3,000 in 2006. And by the time I was a student, I became a student, studied my undergrad in 2010, those fees had gone up to close to £3,500 in that space of time. But then in 2010, the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government voted to treble the fees to £9,000. The Liberal Democrats had signed a pledge not to raise them. They did anyway. The government's assumption was that universities would charge different amounts, that a market would emerge with some institutions charging less to attract students. It was a fatal miscalculation, as almost every single university charged the maximum, £9,000 a year, every year. It's worth pausing here to note that this was an English problem, not necessarily a British one. So devolution meant that students in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were sheltered from the worst of these hikes initially. Okay, so Scottish students to this day pay no tuition fees at all. The fees explosion was initially a specific English policy decision, but it's then had consequences on Welsh tuition fees, for example, that often mirror the English system. Back in England, something else was shifting too. As students took on more and more debt to fund their education, their legal status began to change. In 2015, substantive consumer rights were introduced for university students. If universities didn't meet their obligation, they could be in breach of consumer protection law. Students were no longer just learners. They were becoming very clearly consumers, and universities were increasingly becoming businesses. This became known as Plan 2, the loan system for students who started university in England and Wales from September 2012 and concluded on the 31st of July 2023. Some of those students are now into their 30s. Many are nowhere near repaying what they owe because the interest accumulates faster than the repayments can clear it. For graduates earning over £50,000 a year, Combining income tax, national insurance, and student loan repayments pushes their effective marginal tax rate above 50%. It's basically like a shadow tax that's sort of sitting over graduates now. And it isn't just graduates who are feeling the strain. The universities themselves are struggling. Tuition fees income frozen in real term for years, while inflation has eaten into its value and has left 3/4 of English universities facing financial deficits. The system is under pressure from both ends, the institutions delivering the education and the graduates who paid for it, and the wider public as well. Taxpayers' money, let's not forget, has been spent on higher education and in maintaining the debt. But policy and numbers only tell part of the story. Shortly, you'll hear from graduates who are on Plan 2 loans. Before we hear from them, I wanted to touch briefly on my own experience. I have student loans, too, a Plan 1 loan from my undergraduate years because I was part of the pre-2012 cohort, and a Plan 3 loan from my postgraduate qualification from Cardiff University from my master's. So I'm not a Plan 2 borrower, but I watched the system change around me in real time. In my final year at University of Kent, our School of Politics and International Relations ran weekly open lectures. Anyone could attend, eager first years sitting alongside final year students like me. But here's the thing, I was paying £3,500 a year in tuition fees. The first years sitting next to me were paying £9,000. Same lecture hall, same lecture, same experience, nearly 3 times the cost. This disparity struck with me then, and it strikes me now. If you're paying more, should you not be receiving more? It raises uncomfortable questions about what a university education is actually worth and who gets to decide how much it's worth. It's worth noting briefly that this kind of fee inequity and equality is nothing new. International students have been faced for years, for decades, paying as much as 100% or 200% more in their fees compared to home students for exactly the same education. The lecture hall has had a 2-tier price tag for quite some time. The introduction of Plan 2 just made that more visible to a whole new generation of domestic students. When I graduated university in 2013, I started on the job hunt. I eventually found work in the Students' Union movement, working first at Hertfordshire Students' Union and then Cardiff Students' Union, before switching over to Cardiff University. I spent a decade working in the sector, seeing the push towards the marketisation of higher education. Student expectations grew, universities' abilities to meet that demand became challenging, particularly when the lockdowns came in 2020. At the time, I was overseeing international student welcome at Cardiff University. Cardiff was in a particularly challenging situation because it was heavily reliant on international student income. Close to 25% of students were not from the UK, and the wider student experience heavily relied on the draw of the city. With lockdowns and students stuck in dingy student accommodation, unable to mix with their peers, explore the city and nightlife, their student experience was heavily dampened. A few years later, I left the university to become a student there, studying an MA in political communication at the University School of Journalism, Media and Culture. It's here I was sharing a classroom with peers as much as 10 years younger than me. Students who had only ever known the post-2012 system, whose own education had been disrupted by university staff strikes and lockdowns. Now, the recipient of education from Cardiff University, I could see the limitations of what the university could offer me. The school had over-recruited on master students. There were talks of cuts on the way with a new vice-chancellor. Stories were beginning to emerge of mounting financial pressures across the sector. And I actually explored this in a previous episode from 2025, which is called Cuts at Cardiff University. I completed my course in the autumn of 2024, graduated last year. I now owe nearly £7,000 for my undergraduate student loan on an interest rate currently at 3.2%. I started with debt of just over £10,500. My interest rate fluctuates with the sort of wider economic conditions, so ranging from as low as 1.75% to as high as 9% during the mini-budget chaos under Liz Truss. If I continue on my current income, it will likely result in me paying off my loan in about 10 years' time, so it will have taken about 25 years to pay off. But that wholly depends on the wider economic picture. However, when I studied my MA in political communication, I took out a plan free loan similar to the 2012 terms and conditions. The interest on my loan has not dropped below 7%. 18 months after graduating, I've not made a dent in my repayments. Debt started accruing during my studies, and I am unlikely to get ahead of my payments until I'm earning in excess of £66,000 a year. Based on current projections and career progression, I may never earn that amount of money a year, so will technically never get ahead of those repayments. So that's my situation. I've been a witness to the tuition fee rises, shared classrooms with the first cohort, 2012, worked in the sector for 10 years, and then experienced university as a mature postgraduate student, witnessing an education model now under serious strain. Now let's hear from the Plan 2 graduates who ended up with far more debt than me. You'll hear from my friends Josh, Tom, Emily, Alex, Brie, and Bee, who all went to university after the 1st of September 2012. Emily, you might recognise from previous episodes of the show. First, here's Josh, who was part of that 2012 cohort.
Okay, hi, I'm Josh. I studied at Swansea University. I studied philosophy, politics, and law. And I studied between the years 2012 and 2015. So, looking at my starting debt, I can see £24,686.57. But going on my current outstanding debt as of the 9th of April, we're talking £27,569.89. I kind of wish you didn't ask me to do this exercise now. I've maybe been a bit ignorant to this before and not actually properly paid much attention, but it's actually quite wild if you think about how much more debt I've accumulated through interest. It's quite concerning.
My name's Tom, and I went to the University of Leeds to study an integrated Masters in Mechanical Engineering in September of 2012. My loan amount was about £50,000. Before I'd even finished the course, it had accrued £7,000 worth of interest. I'm currently up to about £73,000 worth of debt. And last year, my interest payments my interest was at £5,000, whereas my payments were only £2,000. Which means that even on a salary of about 50,000, it's never going to get paid off.
My name is Emily, and I studied at the University of Bristol from 2020 until 2024. I studied a joint honours degree in history and Spanish, which means I did a year abroad year, so I paid reduced tuition fees for 1 year out of the 4. After finishing my degree, the total loan borrowed was £58,171, and now I owe £68,672.46. So I've accrued £10,537.46 in interest.
So I'm Alex Miles. I did a degree in history at the University of Exeter, and then I went on to do a master's at Cardiff University in journalism. The total of what I owe is £57,348.30. So, what I've been paying back since pretty much being in solid full-time work since leaving university clearly hasn't touched the sides with all the interest that's been added. So, effectively I see what comes out of my salary every month, which is actually just the postgrad repayment at the moment, effectively as a graduate tax.
Hi, my name is Brianna, and I studied philosophy at UWE Bristol from 2022 to 2025. I borrowed a total of £40,324, and currently I owe £46,392.21, 8 months after graduating.
And last but not least, let's hear from Bee. I used to work with Bee. We recorded a part of a catch-up so she could log into her student finance to see how much she owed.
Okay, so it says my total is £42,571.39.
That's a lot.
So much money.
Does it say how much you've contributed in PAYE, and then also how much interest has been added?
As of 1st of April. So salary repayments.
Yeah.
Any repayments you've made through. Okay. I've currently done £914, and the interest added is 1,453.
So you're always like £400 behind, basically, because it's always adding £400.
Which is really horrible. Yeah, that probably isn't as bad as like now what my friend has said, but that's also because I think he's 20k more because he did 2 years more and then got maintenance.
Cool.
I don't think I'm going to pay that back, am I?
I don't think you are. Sorry. It's just going to be compounded.
I mean that I'll always be behind then.
Yeah, because you're never catching up with, unless you would have to earn over £66,000 a year in order to get ahead of your repayments.
And when will I stop paying? Like, when will it just? Will it end for me?
After 30 years, I think.
Yeah, because my cousin, she's younger and starting salary is lower. I think it's 20, correct. Either 21 or 23. 42 is a lot.
So those are some of the graduates impacted by Plan 2. Now let's hear from someone who is campaigning to rethink the student loan system.
My name's Ollie, and I am the founder of a campaign called Rethink Repayment, which is a campaign arguing for a fairer student loan system for young people. And I started it back in the summer of last year, so summer of 2025, and it's gained quite a lot of traction since then, which has been fantastic. And it's been great to see more people getting involved and making their voices heard about why they think the student loan system is unfair.
Before we get into the campaign details, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you studied and what you wanted to do as a career when you were younger?
I remember speaking to our careers advisor about being an actuary, I think as a very naive, probably 13, 14-year-old. I was looking almost exclusively at the salaries of different jobs, rather than necessarily thinking about something that I would enjoy. So for a long time, I thought I wanted to be a banker. Fortunately, I think from my perspective, I have never been a banker. I don't think I would be a particularly good banker. I don't think I'd enjoy it. But yeah, I've always been interested in economics. I enjoyed maths at school, so I knew I wanted to do something related to that. So I then went to university. I studied a degree called economics and management from 2017 to 2020, and then graduated. And then I went to work in the healthcare technology sector, in a bit of a salesy role, but wasn't a huge fan of that. So yeah, I left, and I guess my sort of career has taken a slightly different course.
What is Rethink Repayment? Who set it up? When? And what are its core aims? Why does the campaign exist?
What is Rethink Repayment? So I set it up last summer. I think I started working on it in May 2025, building the website and thinking about what it might look like. And its core aims really are to advocate, fight for a fairer student loan system for young people in the UK, because I think that as a generation, we don't really make our voice heard enough when it comes to economic issues. I think that we can be very good at campaigning about social issues, which is fantastic. But when we think about the economic situation that we're going to face as a generation, it's going to be significantly harder than our parents in lots of ways. It's going to be much harder for most people to buy houses. It's going to be much harder for people to save up to start families or afford to start families. People are probably not going to be entitled to a state pension in the same way that people are now. And I think that people, don't necessarily realise that. And I think that unless as a generation we speak up for ourselves, we will continue to be taken advantage of. to be quite honest, because if people don't stand up for themselves and vote with their feet and demand better economic policy, then politicians, they just won't make it for young people because they know that they can get more votes elsewhere. So I think that was why I started the campaign. And I think student loans for me crystallized, or was the most salient part of that sort of economic unfairness, the intergenerational unfairness that we face as a generation, because previous generations have been able to go to university for free or very, very low cost compared to what we pay now. And therefore they weren't faced with this, significant monthly outgoing for lots of people, which is their student loan repayment. And that is on top of all of those other economic challenges that we see our generation facing. So that's why I thought it was really important. And I thought that no one else was really doing it. I knew that lots of people were angry about student loans individually, but there wasn't a campaign sort of bringing people's voices together. So I thought, why don't I just start it? I don't have a campaigning background, but I thought that, why not? Why not just do it and see whether it goes anywhere?
What's wrong with the current student loan system in the UK? Who is most affected and how?
What is wrong with the current student loan system in the UK? So that's a really good question. There are lots of things that are wrong with the student loan system. I think that some of the key ones for me are that the repayment threshold now is getting closer and closer to the minimum wage, which means that pretty much everyone who leaves university and gets any sort of job will be making repayments, which goes sort of against the idea that people should make a contribution to the cost of their university if they get an earnings benefit from it. Because now if you're on a Plan 5 student loan, the 25 grand threshold at which you start repaying, and above that 9% of your income goes back to repaying it, that's basically going to be the minimum wage, the full-time minimum wage very soon. And therefore, that's effectively anyone who's working will be paying it back. There are also lots of problems with for example, the interest rates on Plan 2 loans. So they can rise up to RPI plus 3%, which is currently 6.2%. So you can have a really, really high interest rate on your Plan 2 student loan, which means that for lots of people, even when they're making consistent monthly repayments, their balance is going to rise. So you have to be earning over £66,000 for your loan balance to actually fall each year if you have the average loan balance of 53 grand. So that means that you have to earn over 66 grand for the repayments that you make to actually outweigh the interest that's added and your loan to be falling. Another key unfairness really with the system is that if you were fortunate enough that your parents could pay for you to go to university up front, so pay your tuition fees for you so you didn't need to take out a loan, and I've got nothing against those people, like I would have loved to have been in that situation, don't get me wrong, but you effectively then avoid paying any interest on the loan. So the total cost of your loan, the total cost of your degree rather, will be significantly lower than someone that had to take out a loan. So it's not a progressive system in that sense, which some people claim it is. I think another key unfairness is that particularly when the maintenance grants for university were removed by George Osborne, I think it was at the time, which were effectively, payments that for people from lower income households that didn't need to be repaid. When they were removed and that support was just replaced with getting out a higher loan, it means that people from lower income households had to borrow more in order to go to university. So particularly those people who go on to well-paying jobs, they're going to end up paying back vastly more than the initial, 27 grand that their degree and tuition fees might have cost them. There are also problems with mothers in particular. So when they take time out of the workforce to have children, interest keeps accruing on their student loans, but they're not making repayments, which means that if they're in the same job, and this tends to be for people in higher paying professions, but compared to a man in the same job, they might end up paying back much more.
How does the current system affect access to higher education, particularly for students from lower income backgrounds?
I think I just touched on this, but particularly for people from lower income backgrounds, they can end up borrowing a lot more because they can't rely on family support for their living costs. So they take out a higher maintenance loan, which means that they end up, having a larger loan balance when they leave. But it also has an impact because of the way that the compounding of interest works. And what that means is that when interest is added to a loan, that when future interest is added, you're not only paying interest on the amount that you initially borrowed, but you're also paying interest on the interest. And over time, that can have a really big impact on the loan balance. So people from lower income backgrounds can end up sort of having their loan balances balloon even more. Now, if you go into a lower paying job, that might not make much difference because you're not going to pay back, maybe the initial amount you borrowed anyway. But if you're someone who had to borrow more but then goes into a well-paying job or a middle higher earning job, let's say someone like a doctor, they probably are going to pay back significantly more. And we just think that that's not fair.
What would a fairer system look like? What does meaningful reform mean to you and the campaign?
On the Plan 2 loans at the moment, and that's not because we're abandoning people on Plan 5, but we've made a decision as a campaign that the momentum is behind change to Plan 2, and therefore we're going to focus on that one to begin with. So in terms of the Plan 2 loans, and some of these demands, by the way, would apply to the other plans, but the Plan 2 loans, the threshold, which has been frozen a number of times since 2016, and it was supposed to rise each year with average earnings, we would say that that threshold needs to be reinstated to what it would have been had it risen as young people were initially promised when they took out these loans. So that means that it would be about £35,000 by 2020, when at its current rate, it's going to be about £29,500. So the repayment threshold, we think, needs to be higher, as it was promised. The second thing is that we think that all interest rates on student loans should be capped at CPI inflation. So that removes the odd situation for Plan 2, where as you earn more, your interest rate can rise up to RPI plus 3% currently. So by capping it at CPI, then no one's loan balances should be growing by that extortionate amount. It's also important to use the CPI measure of inflation, the Consumer Price Index measure, because that's the official measure of the UK economy. That's the one that the Bank of England targets, for example. Whereas RPI, the Retail Price Index, is normally about 1% higher than the Consumer Price Index. And it's not really a measure that's used anymore. It's actually being discredited by a lot of people. So the fact that government use it to determine interest rate on student loans means that people will end up paying higher interest rates than they should. And then finally, one thing I haven't touched on yet, but the repayment rate, which is currently 9%, which means that above the repayment threshold, 9% of your earnings go back towards repaying your student loan. We think that that should be at a more reasonable rate of 5%, because 9% is really high. If someone said we're going to raise the basic rate of income tax by 9%, there would be, mass uproar. But the fact that students or graduates people are happy with them paying effectively a 9% higher marginal tax rate really doesn't seem fair.
And what progress has the campaign made so far? What are your goals for the year ahead?
So what progress has our campaign made so far? So we've gained a lot of traction, I would say. Hopefully some of your listeners have seen student loans being in the news a lot more, covered by some major news outlets and on things like Newsnight and Question Time. So I think that our campaign's been a key driver of that. I think that we've made a real impact with MPs and brought the issue to their attention. We're speaking to, basically MPs every day, effectively our team, which is fantastic. And our goals for the year ahead are about building more support for the campaign and effectively putting pressure on politicians to enact meaningful change that's going to help young people. Because we all know that the system is not fair, despite what politicians like Rachel Reeves initially said before then admitting that it was broken. Everyone knows that this system is not fair for young people, but we just need to make our voices heard as much as possible. So from a campaign perspective, we need to gain as much, support as possible so that they really can't ignore us.
Can you tell listeners about the MP Student Loans Inquiry that's currently open for feedback from graduates?
Treasury Committee inquiry. So the Treasury Select Committee, which are a group of MPs that scrutinise government finances, public finances, they have released an inquiry into student loans, and that's going to look at whether they think the system is working for young people or not. I'm hoping that overwhelmingly they're going to find that it's not working, which I think, is plainly obvious. But individuals can also submit the impact of student loans on them. So if they head to our Instagram page, which is at Rethink Repayment, or our website, which is www.rethinkrepayment.com, they'll be able to find how they can submit their story to the inquiry, and that takes maximum 5 minutes. But the more of us that do that, and the more of us that show them that it's not working, obviously, the more they will feel compelled to change the system. So that committee can't change anything, but they can recommend the government, and I think the government will have to respond to it.
How can listeners find out more about Rethink Repayment and support your work?
In terms of supporting our work, they can sign our petition, which is probably the best thing that they can do, because that increases, our bargaining power with politicians. But they can also share our campaign with their friends and family. They can donate to help our campaign if they feel able to. So there are lots of different ways to get involved. If they are really, really keen and want to actually get involved with volunteering with us, they can email volunteer@rethinkrepayment.com to find out how they can get involved in more detail. Thank you.
So that was Ollie from Rethink Repayment. As we come to the end of this episode on rethinking student loans, let us all consider the voices you've heard today from Bee, from Tom, from Josh, from Emily, from Alex and Brie, and of course from Ollie at Rethink Repayment. The Plan 2 graduates that you've heard from today are a generation of former students saddled with debt that keeps growing, because interest accumulates faster than repayments can clear it, and because repeated threshold freezes mean graduates are repaying more than ever intended. Think about Tom's debt of over £70,000, or Emily, who's close behind. You can head to the show notes and complete a short form to help the Treasury Committee understand the impact of the loan system. Contributions close on Tuesday, the 14th of April, so you've just got a couple of days if you're listening to this on the day of release. So make sure you respond promptly. In my response to the committee, you've got about 1,000 characters, so you don't really have a great amount of space to sort of cover what you're meant to be saying. But I wanted to explain that I had a Plan 1 and a Plan 3 loan. And the fact that I worked in higher education for 10 years after my undergraduate, and found that students and parents don't really actually fully understand what they're signing up for. So I think it's really important that we also put that focus on the education of what students are signing up for, the choices they're making, and demonstrating in numbers and figures how much they would have to earn to get ahead of their payments, to make it clear what monthly payments might look like before they sign on the dotted line. And my question to lawmakers is, can you justify close to 10% interest on educational loan? It makes the government look like a loan shark. I'm not sure if anyone that makes a difference will hear this and see my comments that I submitted. But I want to make this point really clear. Those who voted this through in 2012 probably did not pay tuition fees. And many of those elected today, they're still paying off a lot of their debt. So I asked them to make change for their former classmates, for their potential voters, and for the next generation, to abolish this shadow tax, make HE loans fair. If you're interested in following the story, I'd recommend heading to Rethink Repayment's website or following them on social media. I've been exploring ways I can change and adapt this podcast to keep it fresh and interesting for you, so I've been tinkering with the purpose and the focus. Future episodes will sound and feel a little bit different. I'm keen on broadening the subject to include creativity, culture, and hearing stories from the margins. I look forward to sharing the new format soon. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow. Credit and thanks to Afro Cluster, Magugu, and Asha Jane. Spare a Thought is a Be the Change Media Network production. My name is Tom Spare. Thanks for listening.